Hi, everyone. Can you hear me with this mic, or is that okay? Can everyone hear me? Okay. I always said I was wired, and I guess I was right. With all these wires, they stuck on me. I guess I only have 50 minutes to talk, which is not as much time as I'm used to. So I decided to, well, actually, I don't normally use slides, because usually I remember back in college, slides meant the lights go down, means I fall asleep. And my entire objective here today is to entertain you for 50 minutes. So if I'm doing a bad job, let me know and I'll switch gears a little. But I did not prepare slides. The other thing to know is that I'm very informal, as you can tell. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to not only raise your hand, but interrupt me as you please. And so I remember, so I was MBA 99. I was also EECS 95. So I relate to all of you in the room. I remember when people used to come to speak, and looking back on it, I remember that I really didn't learn anything or remember anything from their presentations or anything academic. All I really remembered were their stories. And there were some stories I remember that were quite powerful. And so my goal for today is basically to have certain themes based on stories that I'll tell you about our experience with Hot or Not. And hopefully, there's no actual point to them, but hopefully someday down the road, you'll think back and you go, oh, I remember that Hong guy said something, and oh, we should do this or we should do that. And that's entirely my objective. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our Hot or Not experience for maybe 40 minutes or so, or maybe 35 minutes. And then I'll open it up for questions. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself. Well, let me do this first. Let me show you the inspiration to all of Hot or Not and so on, and then we can. I just want to show you something real quick. Okay. So in October, no, maybe summer of 2000, I think, or maybe it was summer of '99. I was hanging out with Jim Young, my roommate. He was a PhD grad student in the EECS department at the time. His advisor was Dean Newton, who was an advisor to our company, who unfortunately passed away, I think last year or a year or two ago. And anyway, we were hanging out, and one day we saw this. So, I don't know, this was 10 years ago, so I'm not sure how many of you actually, did anyone ever see this guy before? So he was known as the Turkish stud. And he was, these are the days when, like the hamster dance, do people know what the hamster dance is? And so that kind of thing back then was pretty rare. And we were pretty fascinated by it. I actually had, when I was obsessed by Mahir, that was his name. This guy, actually, he did not make this, and he did not make the web page that content was based on. He had some other web page that some people hacked and made a joke website, which then took over the world by storm. And like within a month of this guy coming out with, or this site happening, he was, on Letterman, and it was like 1 million people had been to his web page in that month. And so Jim and I were really fascinated by that, because we're like, we'd heard about companies doing that kind of thing with Hotmail at the time, but we'd never heard of individuals doing it. We were just like, man, that guy is so cool. Like, how do we build something like that? So we had this goal in the back of our minds of, how do you become Mahir? How do you get distribution without actually spending money on it, which was, critical for guys like us because we were, broke. And so that was the inspiration. Now let me remember this, and let me just go back and give you a little bit of my background. So like I said, I came to Berkeley in '91, And my parents, being an Asian kid, I was either going to become a doctor or an engineer. Well, actually, preferably lawyer, but if not the two, then I would become an engineer like my dad. So I decided to go into, I went into Eek's department for fun, but I was going to take all the pre-med classes and eventually become a doctor. And what I found was that, well, because I grew up playing with modems and computers and programming and stuff like that, so I just figured I might as well do something fun in the meantime while I take OChem. But what I found in my OChem classes was that I was basically bored as hell. And I never really had as much of an interest in bio back then, so I was just really, doing the doctor thing because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, or it would be a smart thing to do. I think that's how a lot of people end up becoming dentists and pharmacists too. Because who grows up thinking, I want to look at teeth? So I was bored by that, and so my sophomore year, I was doing very well in school, but in those pre-med classes, but I was just so bored that I decided I couldn't take this anymore. So I decided to just focus on the EEC stuff, the electrical engineering and computer science stuff, because that was the stuff that I found was fun. But I found that over time, I actually started getting bored by that as well. I didn't like the sitting in front of the computer screen all night, coding, or in front of a breadboard all day, like sticking wires into stupid breadboards, which I don't think they do anymore. But I got a little bored with that. So when I graduated, I decided I liked technology. I really love technology, but I didn't want to be stuck in a cube all day, like coding or designing. Not to say it's a bad thing, but it just wasn't my personality. So I said, okay, well, I'll go into marketing. So I went to HP, and into what is now the Agilent division, making spectrum analyzers. And so I went there. I went to HP, and there is a point here. There's a theme. It's boredom. So I went to HP, and I got this job. I was brought on to be the third person on a team of 2 people. Well, I was going to be the third, because basically I was a sales support engineer, which means I took phone calls and emails from sales guys in the field who were selling and needed help with the technical product. And the funny thing was that I was brought on as the third person because the 2 people were overloaded. Well, after a month of being at this job, both of them switched jobs. So I was actually now the new guy there for 1 month covering the work of 3 people. And it was a tremendously boring job because I was basically getting questions from the salespeople, and they were always the same questions. And this was 95, and so I basically said, hey, why am I taking these calls? Why am I here till 9 or 10 at night, working at HP, answering the same questions over and over again? Why don't I just make a website or something and then I can tell them, leave me alone, just go to the website. So I asked my boss if I could do that, if I could spend 5 or 10 hours a week building this website, and he said no. He's a great guy, but they didn't really realize. They were from a different generation. They didn't really realize the potential of the web. So naturally, I did it anyway. I just didn't tell him. And within half a year, I basically eliminated my job, and actually in the other people's jobs too, the non-existent people's jobs. So they didn't have to fill them. So that was interesting because basically that was an experience where I was so bored, I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. But quitting my job 2 months after from starting it was not going to work. So I had to do something. So I built something, and I basically solved my problem. Because after I did that, they're like, okay, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, well, I want to build CDMA test products, with all the mobile stuff happening. And they're like, okay, you can be a product manager. So I basically got promoted much quicker than most people would, basically because they had nowhere to put me. And I said I wanted to work on that, and they're like, okay. So I did that, and that was interesting. But what I realized was there were aspects of product management that I found boring, and there were some that were really fun, but I knew nothing about. And so that's why I'm like, okay, I will go to business school and learn about it. And so, well, actually, that's not true. I won't lie. So I actually came to business school because I lived in Santa Rosa for HP, which is, do people know where Santa Rosa is? It's an hour north of here, wine country. Very nice if you have kids. Sucks if you're 21 and single. So I basically decided to go to business school because I was tired of working and I wanted to party. And I heard business school was the good 2 years of pretty heavy drinking. So that's what I did. They actually don't. They're probably going to cut all this stuff out of the tape, I'm sure. So basically, I was bored as hell in Santa Rosa. Like, it's a pretty boring place. The county is 75% agricultural, so gives you an idea of what it was like. So I decided to come to business school. And when I came here, I'm like, I thought I wanted to do a startup like a lot of my friends were doing, but I was also kind of, there was a sirens call at the time of management consulting and banking. I'm sure today that siren song is not as strong, with banking at least. But I actually came here thinking I'm going to do a startup when I get out. I did do the management consulting thing just to try it for the summer, but primarily because they paid the most for the summer. And so I took that job, and it was good financially, but I was so bored. Now, there's a little side story here. While I was at how many people here have ever worked in a consulting or investment banking firm, just so I get a sense? Okay, so have you ever noticed that in these kind of partnership type firms, law firms are probably very much the same, all the admins are really hot. Right? Like, I would go to these places, and I would visit my friends' offices, and I'm like, man, what is going on here? Because this is nothing like HP, So anyway, that's just like so I just had an idea. I'm like, man, it'd be really funny if I had the domain hot admin, and everyone just because I wanted to test this hypothesis that the admins in certain types of firms were hotter than others. So I got the domain, but I never built it. Anyway, that's an aside. So now. But obviously, it comes back to me later. So then I went to business school. I started a company with one of my classmates in '99 out of the business plan class, the entrepreneurship class. And it was a B2B, it was going to be a business-to-business marketplace for the construction industry. Again, the construction industry, which is an industry I know nothing about and I care nothing about, but it seemed like a good idea from a money-making standpoint, and so I said, okay, I'll do that. That's a huge industry, right? So we raised money for that company over the summer following graduation, and around September, I had kind of a meltdown, where I was not wanting to get out of bed because I'm like, what the hell do I know about construction? I don't really care about the products that I'm making. And it was just like, but I was doing it because I thought it might make a lot of money, which, at the time, it seemed like that it was looking good. But I had a long talk with my dad, and he, basically, I decided I don't really care how much money it might make. I don't like getting up in the mornings. I have no passion for this. I really don't give a shit, so I should quit. Because what I realized was that if I continued to work, I would not only not enjoy my life, but I would probably do bad work and be unreliable to my partners, and I was actually doing an injustice to them as well and to the company. So I just basically gave back my shares, and said, okay, I am resolved to do something that, one, does not bore the hell out of me. In fact, I have to do something that is fun. And to me, what was fun was technology and consumer stuff. In particular, MTV and reality programming was something that I got very excited about. I was probably the only MBA who watched Jerry Springer regularly. And MTV is still today my favorite channel. If anyone wants to talk about LC and Low and those guys, we can do that after. Okay, so what's my point? My point is, if you're bored, if you don't love what you're doing, get the fuck out, because you're going to suck at it anyway. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention I swear a lot, too, so if that offends anyone, I'm sorry, but it's how I was raised. Okay, so here I am, and so this takes us to kind of like Thanksgiving of '99, and so I'm hanging out with my friend Jim, who was a grad student at Berkeley. Actually, we went to undergrad together. We got back in touch when I was here for my MBA and he was here for his PhD. And a couple other friends who had just finished grad school, and another one was at Intel and quit his job. And we said, hey, okay, we're gonna start a company, right? By the way, so point number one of this talk, if you didn't get it by now, was if you're bored, get out. Okay. So we all got together and said, we're going to start a company. We don't know what we're going to start, but we're going to do something. That is the hardest part of entrepreneurship. Just that moment, the point where you say, screw everything else, screw the job, I don't care if I'm in debt. You know what, like the reality is a lot of people think, oh, you know, I'm gonna get experience first, and then when I'm older, then I'll be in a position where I'm gonna feel secure that I know what I'm doing and I'm gonna start a company and I'm gonna do great. And some people do that. But the reality is you learn a lot more from trial by fire, okay? And the reality is also that by the time you feel comfortable starting a company, you probably are at that point married, you might have kids, you might have a mortgage, and you'll basically be, your intent might be like, I'm ready to do it, but your risk aversion will have increased significantly to the point where, in reality, when you're younger and when you have fewer liabilities, you're actually in a better position to be an entrepreneur. It's kind of backwards from how most people think. But in reality, your disposition and your ability to cope with the stress of entrepreneurship actually trumps any experience that you might have had over the 10 or 20 years of experience, right? So it's just something to think about. Okay, I'm starting to bore people, so I will go back to the interesting, funny stuff. So anyway, so we were hanging out, and we were, and Mahir came on, and so Jim and I were always obsessed about, man, someday we want to start a Mahir. We didn't say we wanted to start a company. Okay, we just wanted to do it for fun, right? And interestingly enough, it seems like a lot of people who, at least in the internet space, a lot of their origins are not necessarily from trying to start a company. It's from being interested in something, finding something fun, and then just doing it. And then before they know it, they somehow have a company, right? So when we launched, how many people here have seen Hot or Not? Okay, so for those of you who have not, let me just show it to you real quick. Now, we did sell the company in February. We ran it profitably for 8 years, and then, but at the beginning, at the end of last year, we decided we were so bored of running Hot or Not. About year 3 or 4, we were like, God, like it was a great moneymaker, but like it's the same problem every day, and like we want something new. We're both very ADHD or whatever they're calling it now. And so we're like, man, we got to do something new. So at the beginning of this year, we finally sold it to another company. So the site looks very different now than what it was when we ran it, but the site pretty much looked the same thing for 7 or 8 years, primarily because we were too lazy to change it. But the way that it basically worked was this: you would go to this site, and there would be a picture of a person, like this woman here in the white, and this would be a real person who actually submitted their picture. And we were the first website that we did 2 real innovations at the time. One was we were the first website where the content was explicitly being uploaded for strangers to gawk at rather than for your friends to see. Like nowadays, like with MySpace and all the social networks, it seems like that's how the world has always been. But in fact, it was not like that before. Before, it was very protective, and you only wanted your friends to see it and stuff like that. So you would look at this picture. Oh, the other innovation was the fact that we also, I think, were responsible for this, the concept of clicking on a button and then having it automatically go to the next page. Because before Hot or Not, most sites, you would have to hit submit after any form, right? Which today, this is also pretty common. Anyway, as a distraction. So you see, I just rated her an 8 by clicking on the 8, and I can see her official rating is a 9.7 based on 65,000 votes. I rated her an 8, and so on. She checked her score. This one is 2 weeks ago. And then I'm given another person to rate, and so I basically just keep going, and I keep rating it. And it's said to be like potato chips, and it's actually, I know what I would rate, but I know where the gratuitous boobs gets you. But anyway, not enough people have rated her yet. Anyway, so it was a very simple concept. Okay. So we just launched this as a joke. So we always had the hope that it would take off, but our goal was not actually to start a company or to build something sustainable. Our goal was just to build something that would get street cred from our friends of being funny, right? And so we launched this thing, and we had the idea after we went to a party, and I said, oh man, or Jim said, oh man, did you see this girl? She was a perfect 10. I said, no, I didn't see her, but even if I did, I'm not sure I believe you because we have different tastes. And I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if there was a website where we could like settle it, right? And so that was on a Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. drinking beers in our living room, which is not an unusual afternoon that summer. So we're like, oh man, that's funny. And it was kind of like, it was kind of novel back then, the idea of looking at people you didn't know. In reality, the reason that we were most excited by it was because we had all these friends that worked in big companies who worked in cubes. And meanwhile, Jim and I were just hanging out like bums in Mountain View. We would hang out at this one cafe all the time, Dana Street Roasting Company, and we would just people watch all day. And we're like, man, their life sucks. Our life is so fun, And we're just like, man. So we were really excited because, we're like, man, our friends can basically people watch like we do, like from their cubes, And so we built it, and so we built it over the course of a week. And I knew it was a hit when I showed it to my dad. Well, he actually walked in on me as I was testing the site, and he's like, what are you doing? And clearly I couldn't tell him that I was involved in any way because I was supposed to be like finding a job, right, and not working on this. So I told him, this is just something Jim, my co-founder, it's just something Jim is working on. I'm just taking a look. He's like, oh, well, let me see. And it's like, there's like a 60-year-old engineer, Asian guy. Literally, he passed his not pocket protector, but he passed his slide rule on to me. At some point in my engineering career. And that's how, that just gives you an image of my dad. So, he's supposed to be pretty much asexual. And so he starts rating people, and we just stuck people from, I think from some personals website we just put in there as a test bed. And he's like, oh, she's not that hot. Oh, this one, she's really hot. So clearly, obviously I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the hell is going on? My dad, I'm like in the twilight zone. My dad is not asexual. As far as I'd known, he'd only had sex 3 times. That was from my brother, my sister, and me. But at that point, I'm like, oh my God, this is interesting. So I called Jim. I'm like, hey, we gotta launch this thing. This is kind of interesting. We have to do it. So we did. We launched it the following Monday, and so a week after we came up with the idea. And we did it just by emailing 42 of my friends, actually, to be precise. For those who read Douglas Adams, they know that's a very special number. No one knows 42? Okay. But it was a coincidence. I looked back on it. I'm like, oh, right. It was lucky. So I sent it to 42 of my friends around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and by the end of that day, we had about 40,000 unique IPs come to the site. Okay, so it was pretty insane. It was, and that first day, I also did something funny. I used to go rollerblading in the parking lot of a corporate complex near our house, and there was a company called Tell Me, which was later acquired by Microsoft. That was right there, and I was rollerblading. And I just went up to some guy who was getting out of his car, going into the office. I'm like, hey, have you heard of Hot or Not? And he's like, no, what is it? I'm like, oh, dude, just check it out. And then I rollerbladed home as quickly as I could, and I tail minus F'd the log file, which I was basically watching the hits come in. And luckily, they had the name resolution for their IP block. It said Tell Me, so I knew it was a guy. And so I started grepping for Tell Me. I just said, show me all the people from Tell Me, all the hits from Tell Me. And it was just like, boop, 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 boop. It started growing like crazy. And as a test, I went back the next day, and I just was rollerblading in the parking lot again. I went up to some other random person, and I said, hey, have you seen some site where you rate them? And they're like, oh, yeah, Hot or Not, dude. Right? And I'm like, yes, that's awesome. It's growing like crazy. Okay, so that's the fun part. But let me tell you about the problems we had, because I'm going way too long. So the first point I made was that boredom is a good motivator, and you need to do what you love, not what you just think will make you a lot of money or please your parents or whatever. Okay, so let me go to the second theme, which is that it's very important to try hard to be smart and creative. And in fact, it's probably more important to be smart and creative than to work hard. At least that was kind of our lazy man's mantra or whatever. That was our philosophy. So let me talk about being creative. Okay. So the reason I like to come back to business schools in particular, but also engineering schools, is because I remember the curriculum that I got when I was studying entrepreneurship, where everyone's like, you build a business plan, then you go to angels or VCs, and then you blah, 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 blah. It's very packaged. There's nothing wrong with it. You learn a lot. But my only point is, it's not the only way things happen. And it's actually a very civilized way of looking back on things and writing cases, right? It's like every Harvard review case starts off with, James was looking out his window one day across the Charles River and he had this challenge. How was he going, at the end, it's like, how would he solve it, right? And then in the end, you come back to class and it's like, oh yes, clearly he did this and this and this, and this created competitive advantage, which blah, and so it's, oh, he's a genius, right? But it never actually happens that way. Entrepreneurship is not like jousting, very civilized. It's more like street fighting. And there's a lot of things that you can do. You want to maintain your integrity, of course. That goes without saying. But there's a lot of things that you can do to be creative and think, to do things as scrappy as you can. And it's very important to have that ethic of being scrappy and smart and outsmarting your rivals and doing things 20 times more efficient than they can do early on, because everything you do later, as you add more people and as you scale, will reflect those values, right? And if you want a perfect example, a good example of this is like Friendster. How many people today, it is growing again, but how many people have been to Friendster? Raise your hand. How many people regularly still go to Friendster? Okay. How many people go to Facebook? Okay, Facebook scaled, Friendster did not. And that was Friendster's problem. Why did they scale? Why did Friendster not scale? For loads of reasons, but because they didn't scale and do things as smart as they could do in the very early days, it didn't scale, and then their site was super slow, and then other people who could scale the application came in and beat them. And that happens time and time again. If you look at Google, blazingly fast. They've always had kind of like an obsessive thing about being fast. In fact, I think they still put how long it took the page to load at the bottom. That was, Larry and Sergey have they're engineers, they were EECS majors, and that's just how they are. And that speed on the internet wins, to be honest. More than anything, if you can make your stuff fast and reliable, that is a competitive advantage. Okay, let me get to my stories. So one of the problems for us was, how are we going to make money? We were initially hosting the pictures ourselves, but back then bandwidth cost about $1,000 a megabit per megabit per second. So for reference, today you can probably get it for about $10. Okay, so the very first day we were there, we had the site up. At the end of the night, we were looking at bandwidth, and we're like, oh my God, Jim, this site's going to cost us like $100,000 a month, and it's doubling every 5 hours, right? And we're broke. And so I'm like, this is not acceptable. We can't do. What are we going to do? We almost shut the site down. Instead, what we did, I remember I was sitting in the In-N-Out parking lot. The drive-through at about 1:15, because they closed at 1:30. And I just remembered someone had just told me, GeoCities, which was a service that Yahoo used to run, you can FTP stuff to it. So I called Jim. I'm like, Jim, why don't we just FTP all our pictures to GeoCities and let Yahoo pay the bill? And so we did that. And then we started telling users, hey, don't give us your pictures. Why don't you go to GeoCities, open an account, and give us a URL of the picture, and we'll just put that code in our pages, and therefore we don't pay. And that's what we did, and it worked. And so we took basically what was our biggest cost driver, which was bandwidth, and we made it free, right? Subsequently, a month later, Yahoo shut down the ability for people to do that, except they whitelisted us, which was very strange. But years later, I had to go up to them to talk about something else. But in the process, I had to sheepishly ask, thank you very much, but why? And they said, well, we really love Hot or Not. We didn't want to be the guys that killed it. And I was like, yes, that's good enough reason for me. Anyway, so So we had made our biggest cost driver our cost, free. But we actually took it one step beyond. So I was at a office warming for Zip Realty, which was founded by two of my classmates at Haas. And there was a guy there named Birch who was friends with the guys at Ophoto. And I'm like, oh my God, I would love to meet those guys. So he actually introduced me to Ophoto. And a couple days later, we had a deal with Ophoto where instead of sending everyone to GeoCities, we said, hey, but if you have a digital camera, which most people actually did not have digital cameras yet at that point in time. They had friends who gave them a picture. But if you happen to have a digital camera, instead of going to GeoCities and creating an account, go to Ophoto and create an account and do it there. And Ophoto paid us for every user that we sent their way. And so that was actually our first revenue stream. We basically took what was our biggest cost, made it free, and then cut a deal to where we actually started making money from it. So users were now a profit center instead of a cost center, right? So that's one thing that we did. Another thing, so our next biggest cost, or another large cost, was machines. So not just bandwidth, but what about all the machines that we have? So we started the site on a machine that I got for free from E-Trade for opening an account with more than $400 in it, and or more than $1,000. And it was literally like a $400 machine, which today would be like buying a $100 machine or $200 machine. It was like bare bones, like no memory, no anything. And so we're like, oh, actually, let me go back to, when we still had the bandwidth problem, before we figured out we should stick it on GeoCities, we actually stuck it in Corey Hall. Right? Because Jim, like I said, was a grad student. So we kind of like stuck it under his desk, and we covered, we put a box over the power supply so no one could switch it off. We stacked a bunch of books with it in front of it, and we stuck it under his desk. And so there was just kind of like this lone wire coming out, and we plugged it not into his jack, but into the jack of this other dude that he didn't like who was across the room. And so we get a call. We get a call like 5 hours later from Berkeley, I think from Jim's advisor, because some dude in IT at Corey must have come into his office and looked at the bandwidth graphs and started freaking out and followed a wire to Jim's desk where he so we had to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for machines for this thing? And so what we did was we thought about it. We're like, look, we have no money. Okay, but what we do have at that point, we had a ton of attention. We were getting interviews from the Wall Street Journal, and we were in Time and People magazine in the first 2 weeks, and New York Times. I think I said that. We were basically in every major publication in the U.S. and possibly in Europe within the first 2 months. So what we did is we called Rackspace, which was a managed hosting company, a company that basically lends you machines. And we said, hey, listen, we're perfect for your model, except for one problem, which is that we don't have money. But if we did have money, you'd be perfect because you have machines ready to go, and it's financed instead of being paid for up front. And so, hey, do you think you can help us out and help us scale? And I promise you, I will mention you on every kind of techie or finance related, because they wanted to go public at the time. I think they just filed. They didn't go public, but they just filed recently, 8 years later. I said, so come on, we can be your poster child. And they said, okay. So we actually did not pay for machines for the first year. And they basically, every day that week, we would call them and they would give us more machines. So we basically turned our attention into money. Or rather, not into money. We turned our attention into servers we needed, and they wanted the attention. And we just skipped the money step, right? And so that's another story. One last story was, okay, we wanted to stick ads on the site at the time. So the problem was that we were not necessarily moderating all the content, and every now and then, probably a little more now than then. There's quite a bit of porn being submitted. And you can't do that when you have ads on the site. Advertisers aren't going to like that. So we're like, well, how are we were getting thousands of submissions a day. How are we going to go through all of them? So can anyone guess what we did? Okay, yes. Well, users, yes, but that actually was what we did second. The first thing I did was I called my parents who were retired, and they were looking at the porn all day. So, like I said, my parents were retired, so we built a tool for them to moderate the pictures as they were coming in. And that lasted about a day and a half. I called my parents to ask them how it was going. My dad's like, oh yeah, it's really interesting. Today mom saw a picture of, 3 guys and 2 girls, and they were doing this and that. And I'm like, I don't want to know. Like, so I told Jim, I'm like, Jim, we can't have my parents looking at porn all day. We gotta do something about that. And that's when we figured, well, we didn't have money to pay people, but we had a ton of users who just wanted to look at. And frankly, a lot of them wanted to see the porn, right? So we built this thing where it's like where users can sign up to be moderators, and they can look at the pictures for us, and they would look at it actually before it would go on the site, not just a flagging report. We actually started with a report of inappropriate link, but then we actually went to every picture was looked at by 8 to 10 people before it would go on the site. Okay, kind of doing a wisdom of the crowd, seeing the majority of people had to vote in one direction than the other, and that would make the decision. Okay, so I guess I'm running low on time, so I'm going to just say, be scrappy, right? There's no shame, even if you have 10 million, I don't care how much money you've just raised. If you're not acting like you're almost out of cash, now, not stupidly, you need to spend the money on the things that count. You need to spend on quality infrastructure in order to make sure your site's fast as possible or whatever. But my point is, you don't have to do things the way that everyone else would do it because that's the kind of cool way to do it, or you look cool to everyone for doing it. You look like you have money. You look, don't be afraid. Like if you're gonna buy a car from a car salesman, don't show up in a tux. Show up in like sweats and like a t-shirt or something like that, right? Like you don't need to. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're trying to build your thing as scrappy and as efficiently as you can, so you save money. You don't have to raise more money, so the VCs have control, whatnot. That's my point number 2. I don't really have a point number 3. Well, I kind of do. Don't give up. Okay, so Hot or Not was actually not my first startup. It was my 3rd startup. The first startup was the business one, the B2B construction one. I said, I got to get the hell out of here. The second one was a couponing company that actually, looking back on it, was actually would have been a good idea to have kept going, but the market crashed in 2000, so we said, forget it. And then Hot or Not. Okay. My best friend started PayPal. Do people know how PayPal started? Anyone? They were a database encryption company. And then they said, oh yeah, it's really cool. We can do this database encryption on the Palm Pilot. And then they realized no one really wanted it. So then they said, well, we need to build applications for it. Then they'll want it, right? So they said, let's. When do you need security? Like, okay, let's beam money. So they started this thing where they could beam money on top of the Palm Pilot. So that was their second company, iteration of their company. And they did this thing where their venture money was beamed to them or something like that, like $10 million or something like that. And then they realized, hey, you know what, no one really wants, as an afterthought, someone had the very clever idea of saying, hey, why don't we make it so you can also email, because I don't have a Palm Pilot, right? So they built this email money to people thing. At which point all these eBay users started using them. At which point they started freaking out and said, stop it. So they shut eBay users off. Okay? And then I think like a day later they wisened up. They're like, why the hell are we actually moving away, trying to stop users, to stop traction and like blindly try to stick to our plan? Screw the plan, go for traction, right? Go for what works. Go for what sticks. Most of your business plans, if you write a business plan, will be useless by the time you finish your company because everything will have changed. Business plans are written, they're good to write as a thought exercise to think ahead, but just know that nothing ever happens according to plan. And don't give up, because like I said, it was PayPal's 3rd iteration as a company before they actually hit it. Hot or Not was my 3rd, and actually it was Max's 3rd startup. And we can go through countless numbers of entrepreneurs who, like people are not going to necessarily have your vision. They're not going to necessarily believe in what you're saying. But basically, unless you persevere and you just keep trying, you'll never succeed, right? So I know it's kind of cliche to say it, but it's cliche when you're not in it, but when you're actually under the stress of entrepreneurship, which I describe as the best description I have for entrepreneurship is that it's like volunteering to be bipolar, right? Because the ups are really, really high, and you're like when things are going well, you're super happy, and then the next day something goes wrong, and you're like, oh crap, it's over, which oddly sounds like some of my previous relationships, but now I'm in a nice, stable one. This is taped, right? I love you. So it really is very stressful. So it's very easy to want to give up when you're like freaking out, right? And actually, there was a speaker who came to Haas when I was here. I think it was Arthur Rock or someone else. Anyways, it was a very prominent VC. And he said, the great thing about the Valley is if you fail, this is one of the few places in the world where you're like patted on the back for it. And it's like, good job, like learn from that, try again. So you do that and you work on your second idea and it's like, you might fail again. And yet, like where else in the world can you fail twice? And again, they'll be like, oh, he has a lot of experience. Let's give him more money or let's. And the final part of his story was, well, if you try a third time and you fail, maybe God's telling you something, which is like, but anyway, so I think that's all I really have to say. My 3 points: do what you love. 2, be as creative as you can, and really offset your, see how you can turn your liabilities into assets, or look for your upside. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Try to figure out what your assets are. I must have written this when I was drunk or something, but I wrote this like a while ago. Take what you have and really think about what you have, because the only thing is not money. You might have other things like we had, attention, or so on. And try to offset your liabilities with those instead of cash, and don't give up. Yeah, so I think there's only 10 minutes left. That's what I was aiming for to end. So now I will open it up to any questions you want, and you can ask anything. I will not lie. Okay, you're first. What am I working on now? So really? Was I that boring? Okay. So right now I've been angel investing over the last couple of years in various companies. Slide, which is Max's company, which I'm wearing a shirt for. Mochi Media, BitTorrent, Simply Hired, various companies. So I've spent a little time helping them out, but basically I've been sitting in my pajamas watching TV. No, I'm serious. I am watching MTV and all those shows. And I'm now working. I have a few side projects that I'm working on now. The way I like to operate, I like to just have ideas and do them for fun. And if they don't work out, then who cares? I don't like to put all my egg, I don't want to be depressed if it doesn't work. And if it works, then maybe we'll turn it into a company. I also started this other company, SaveMyAss.com, with my friend Al Lieb, who was the founder of Evite. It's kind of a funny idea. We had basically guys sign up, and it sets up a schedule to send their girlfriend or wife flowers on a regular but semi-random basis. So semi-random, so they don't know, it doesn't become expected. It's like very Pavlovian, like, oh yeah, like if it's like every first Friday I get flowers, and the next Friday it's no surprise, right? It has to be surprised. We also encourage them to we also get them to send just because flowers, which are actually the ones that count. Because if they're expecting it, like I said, then it doesn't count for anything, or you don't really get the points. And we actually built this into a very good business, but we're both too lazy to scale it on the marketing side. So it's just kind of sitting there. We're waiting for someone else to take it over from us. But anyway, I'm just consulting a lot to my friends and hanging out and trying to work on fun ideas. Someone up there will have, yeah.
Looking back at what do you do now? Do you do more of an engineering degree or your business degree?
Neither and both. I don't know. I mean, Like, do you use what you learned in 3rd grade or 4th grade more? Do you even remember what you learned in 3rd grade? Like, what did I learn? What did I learn in business school? What did I learn in engineering? I mean, to be serious, I think both schools train your mind in different ways. I don't think school is the only way for you to get that training. And some people are just born thinking in certain ways. I mean, certainly some of the most brilliant inventors I know didn't even finish high school. So what, you know? And the other side of that question is, well, what do you need? It's going to differ based on what you're doing and what your strengths are and what your partner's strengths are, right? So I don't know really how to answer that question, to be honest. It's not a bad question, but I think it's kind of like, it seems like the intent of that question is to find out what are the things for you to focus on as individuals as you try to become entrepreneurs. And really, that's a very subjective, it's an individual answer for everyone, you know? But that being said, like, you know, networking was good. In Haas, you do a lot of that. And in engineering, thinking logically, breaking down problems, you know, you do that in both schools. So the one thing I will say about this is in business school and in engineering school, they tend, you know, never the twain shall meet, right? Like, people tend not to mix. And that is a bad idea in general. Because, yes, maybe as engineers, you have good business sense intrinsically. And there are certainly many of those types out there, right? And yeah, the business guys, yeah, maybe you can hire people to build what you want, right? But the reality is the best teams are not the ones that are heavy on one specific concentration. The best teams are the ones that have the fewest number of people in them as possible, such that that small group can do everything, right? And whatever composition that group is, you know, whether they're all from engineering or all from business, or more likely a mix, you know, whatever succeeds, right? So I'm totally off your question now, but the point I was trying to make is that it's really a shame that when I was guilty of this, when I was in engineering school, I thought, business people are lame. And then when you go to business school and you get a little older and then you look at the engineers saying business people are lame, you start saying, oh man, engineering punks are just idiots because they're like, they don't have vision and blah, 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 which may or may not be true. My point is, have no preconceptions of anyone you ever meet, whatever their background is. Like I said, some of the smartest, most accomplished people never even went to high school, never even finished high school. So think about it. And it's not something I'm going to convince you of in one session, but.
You said that after 3 or 4 years after founding Hot or Not, that you began to get
Bored as hell.
Yeah, bored again.
Yeah.
You didn't sell your company until like last February. So what were you doing in between?
Oh God, I drank heavily. I'm not joking. So 4 years in, I left and just said I was going to be on the board, and my co-founder Jim said he would become CEO. He lasted a year and a half. And then I came back for a while, and then for a while we had these really great engineers that we recruited from HKN, from EEC's department here. They were all young kids, and we basically let them run the company basically for 2 years. Actually, is Josh here? Okay, one of them was going to come by. He's back in grad school here now, but we basically let the kids run the company for a good 2 years. And they did a pretty good job of keeping it up. And I traveled a lot. I partied a lot, and you know, and I'm glad because I met my now fiance while I was traveling we were both on vacation in Shanghai. So, okay, one more. Okay.
How much money did you end up making over the course of
God, it's so funny that you asked that because my friend George was very early. He's like number 7 or something at Google, and he's Lebanese, and he goes to Lebanon, and he's like, yeah, they always ask that question, like straight out, like different culture, like it's cool to ask that. I'm like, I'm desperately trying to remember what his response to that question is, so I can give it because it was pretty funny, but shoot. Anyway, how much money did we make? We made enough that I could sit in my living room and watch MTV all day for the rest of my life, and that's pretty much okay. So let me actually okay. So to be non-flippant. the rumored price is not entirely accurate, but it's fairly accurate. There's a little bit more than that. But the reality is that we also made a lot, people never think about this, but when you don't take venture funding and you own the whole thing and you're profitable, that money, it's going somewhere and it's going in your pocket, right? So we actually made a lot of money running it for the 7 years. It's kind of funny though, the Valley is so focused on the exit that never even, like it's basically, the way we thought of our lives, we ran a laundromat. We keep the machines running and people just keep coming in and giving us quarters. And we just gotta like come in at the end of the week and like empty the machines, right? I mean, literally, we were working about 10 hours a week each for a very. We built the company up to about $4.5 million, I think about $4 million in revenue and about 3 point something in earnings before we hired our first employees, and that was running it out of the house, working 10 hours a week, right? And today, the scale of the internet, you can make a lot more with the same level of resources. What is my point? No real point. I'm just trying to convolute the whole topic so I don't have to actually answer your question. But we made enough. There was someone at Sequoia that said this. Everyone is familiar with the concept of fuck you money? No? Yeah? Okay. Basically, the level of money that you need to be able to say fuck you to anyone in the world, doesn't matter who they are, and not give a shit, right? Basically, it's like enough money to pay for your house and your kids going to college and like living whatever lifestyle you want and not caring if anyone doesn't like you. I made my fuck you money. And in reality, that's all you really ever need. Because if you think about it, all the insecurities we have about the future and needing to make money are so I can support my kids or so I never run out of money. And once you feel like you have enough that you're never going to run out, you basically just bought your life back. Okay? I can do whatever I want. I can leave, get on a plane, go somewhere, or I can go home and code, and I don't care. Like, I don't have to do anything. And that's basically, like, how much money would you spend to save your life, right? I don't know, like, there's a connection to what I just said and what I was thinking. I'm not exactly sure now what it is, but I bought my life back, and I made enough to feel free. And that's really the goal for me.
Thank you so much.